Well, hello everyone. I'll just accept one last person. Here we go. Hello everyone, and please receive a very kind welcome on behalf of the World Benchmarking Alliance, WBA, and the Urban Transformation Team. My name is Sibora Dhima. I'm the Engagement Manager for the Urban Benchmark. And I'd like to start by thanking you all for registering in the event, for sending insightful questions our way in the past days, and for joining today. I also kindly remind you that this meeting is being recorded so that we may share it with multiple stakeholders in the coming weeks. As we've shared in our email in the previous weeks, the Urban Benchmark is an integral part of the transformation benchmarks of the WBA. It aims to address the critical challenges posed by urbanization, climate change, and other global trends. We do this through insights on how the world's most influential companies can contribute to making cities more inclusive, safe, resilient, and environmentally sustainable. The methodology for the Urban Benchmark is now live on our website, and today we are gathered here to launch its first iteration. We'll have Tony Hartanto, our benchmark lead, in the first part of the session, introducing WBA, the work that we do, as well as the background motivation for the urban benchmark methodologies development. And following that, Besmira Dyca, our research lead, will elaborate the rationale behind company selection, measurement areas in our methodology, as well as the next steps in terms of our research process in the coming months. And lastly, I'd just like to say we'll follow up this webinar by sending you the recording, of course, and the presentations, and also a Q&A document with the answers of questions that were shared with us in the past days, questions that you may share with us today, and some information on the steps ahead. So I give my word to Tony then to kickstart the launch. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Sibora. And I would like to open this presentation, I guess, by thanking everyone first for their attendance in this event, as well as the interest and support in many different capacities, really. Some of you have given us input, some of you has engaged with us in the past. Some of you, I noticed that we do have companies in this call, may work with us in the future in our company engagement phase as well, right? So I'd like to thank all of you for attending today's session. And as you know, creating a sustainable urban environment is very much a multi-stakeholder effort. So we are really grateful for your interest in this initiative. That being said, right, I promise that we'll start off this presentation with a little bit of introduction of what the WBA is and what is it that we're doing. Because of course, some of you may have already heard about us in the past, or have maybe engaged with us in the past, but there are perhaps a few new faces as well in this little meeting of ours. So I think it's pertinent for us to start off this meeting by introducing what WBA is, what we do, and how the urban benchmark plays into this. But roughly speaking, very broadly speaking, right, the WBA is a nonprofit organization whose work revolves around the development of corporate benchmarks, which we then use to assess companies to measure their contributions towards the SDGs. We do this because we believe companies are a key actor in advancing or expediting our progress towards the SDGs overall, along with other actors as well, of course, but focusing on company actors mostly. And this tallies with our mission of to build a movement to measure and incentivize business impact towards a more sustainable future that works for everyone. But it also contributes to our vision, which is a society that values the success of businesses by what it contributes to the world. And we mentioned that we develop benchmarks for companies, right? But especially as an institution, we've identified these 7 systems of transformations that we believe are vital to put our society, planet, and economy on a more sustainable and resilient path in alignment with the 2030 agenda. And we call it transformation systems, but think of them as industry groups with subsectors under each of these ones, each of the transformation systems, with urban, of course, being one of them. And in terms of the subsectors that is covered under this transformation systems, my colleague Besmira will get into more detail about that later on. But essentially, it's these 7 systems of transformations that we work on in WBA. And another principle that we operate under is the corporate accountability principle, which in a nutshell, basically, it recognizes its businesses' roles in contributing to a more sustainable future. And because of that, of course, companies are also accountable for the impact of their operations and actions. One thing to note here is that, of course, emphasis being a multi-stakeholder effort. Corporate accountability processes, as we have identified it, does have multiple gaps, many of which we try to address, but of course we can't really address all of them on our own. Hence, why it's important for us to have multi-stakeholder cooperation. Let's see. Yeah. And as I mentioned before, of course, right, a huge component of our work is the development of benchmarks. And essentially what we do with these benchmarks is that we try to translate the global agendas and the needs of people that are most affected into methodologies to assess companies. And this, I think, is particularly important because, of course, given the number of global issues that we're facing today, whether it's climate change, whether it's housing issues, whether it's other issues, essentially, right? We have global issues translated into global agendas and global commitments and then global indicators. But again, these are global most of the time, right? We need something to translate these issues, agendas, and indicators into something that is applicable for at the organizational level. Right, at the organizational level, we see such initiatives happening, for example, in SDG localization initiatives, but those are mostly for municipal governments. And what we're doing here essentially is we're trying to do something along those lines for companies, therefore creating clarity and guidance for companies to live up to their role and set the responsibilities. And of course, after completing the methodologies themselves, we use them to assess the impact of the world's 2,000 most influential companies, of which urban companies makes up a subset of these companies, these 2,000 companies. After that, publishing the results of our research into the public domain, making it freely available to society at large. A little bit of context, I guess. I've been talking a lot about how our institutions are focused on developing benchmarks across the 7 systems transformation, right? And you may briefly see in the previous slide that we have quite a number of different transformation in the World Benchmarking Alliance, the agriculture and food system, digital system, social system, and many others, really. But the urban system, as the title of this presentation and the invitation suggests, the urban system is currently in its first iteration, right? It's the latest benchmark to be released by the World Benchmarking Alliance, and we're very much excited to see this materialize and learn from the insights that we may garner from the benchmark. Just a little bit about companies' contribution in shaping the urban environment. I'm not going to go too much into the details of this one, but essentially, of course, companies are a key actor in many economic activities across different regions and across different countries, right? In terms of employment alone, companies make up a significantly larger portion of the world's total employment today, and as well as economic activities. And many of these economic activities, given the rapidly globalizing, urbanizing world that we live in right now, happens in urban areas, of course. So, of course, companies have a huge impact in increasing prosperity in our daily lives, but also contributing to many other issues as well, including climate change. And in terms of shaping their contribution in shaping the urban environment, the physical urban environment, right? We are seeing significant examples of how companies can influence how urban built environments are shaped. These are examples that are apparent. There are examples that are apparent that are advanced in both advanced and emerging economies. But going back, really, what does this all mean for our efforts to shape a more sustainable urban environment? Because through our benchmarking exercise in the urban benchmark, of course, that is the ultimate goal, right? We realize that creating a sustainable urban environment is a collective effort, right? Involving many other stakeholders, including, of course, most particularly local governments and governments as well, right? But given the cases that I've highlighted before, right, it's clear that companies can potentially also make major contributions in this effort. So there needs to be a mechanism to align the work of different actors towards the SDGs. And of course, the urban sector being traditionally a very public sector, right? Our benchmarking exercise in the urban benchmark very much tries to gain better clarity, really, on what companies' roles ought to be in this effort. One last point that I would like to highlight from the World Benchmarking Alliance's work is the alliance, really. I mean, as the name suggests, World Benchmarking Alliance, right? The alliance. The work that we do, many of the goals that or ambitions that we have mentioned so far might sound big, and it is a pretty big goal. It is a pretty ambitious goal, but for one organization alone, it is. But hence the alliance of our name, right? In our name, more than just developing benchmarks and doing research, we also work with our network of allies, essentially, to amplify our benchmarks as well as making sure that they're actually used to influence decisions. So it's not just about developing benchmark per se, it's also about making sure that the findings and the insights of the benchmark are actually used. And we rely very much on our network of allies to do this. Some examples of how our previously established benchmark or the benchmarks that we have already released from other transformation sectors have been picked up and used. Can be seen, for example, in this corporate human rights benchmark, which is used by this NGO called Japan NGO Center for International Cooperation, picks up the corporate human rights benchmark during the creation of the corporate action checklist, which is a pilot for 16 Japanese companies and 2 multinational companies. Other groups that are important in our alliance would be the investor allies. And this group is particularly important for us to push for the change that we want, especially because, and it can be seen really from the number of financial institution allies that we have from 2020 to 2023, the number of financial institution allies that have joined our alliance have grown rapidly from just 26 to 50 in 2023. For investors, of course, different stakeholders would use our data differently. But for investors, they mainly use our data to identify companies with good long-term prospects. We've identified a number of cases back in 2020, and this number has gone up in 2023 by 233 from 40, also, as well as they use it to inquire companies on what they are doing or not doing on certain issues. The latest example of this one can be seen in the Ethical AI Collective Impact Coalition that our digital team is working on right now. And these are the number of investors that are involved in that initiative. That being said, of course, companies being our primary target of our assessment, I would say, is, of course, we also work with companies, although in order to maintain our objectivity and independence of our assessments, right? Companies are not exactly part of our alliance per se, but we do see cases where companies are using our, again, freely available data to improve their practices. In the case of CHRB, we have seen cases where these 3 companies, Nissan, Renault, and Mahindra, are using the findings that are from the corporate human rights benchmark to improve on their human rights practices, to improve their, to integrate additional items into their reporting strategy, to implement e-learning courses to train their employees, educating them about human rights issues, as well as establishing project teams and working in groups on human rights. So those are some of the examples of which companies have used our data to improve their practices. And aside from that, of course, aside from the benchmarking results itself, we also develop scores and scorecards for companies, scorecards and rankings for companies. And this helps companies measure their relative performance to other peers in the same sector, right? Relative being the key word here. But our benchmarking process, if I have to make any particular note of this, is that our benchmarking process are done independently from these companies, though we do have a phase in our research process where we engage with companies and provide room for clarification and feedback, therefore making sure that the process is inclusive, making sure that we are incorporating the latest data that the companies have. I guess that's it, I guess, from my side in terms of brief introduction to WBA's processes, Sibora. I'll pass it back to you for now for any Q&As, questions from the audience maybe, but that's it for me. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Tony, and thank you for also bringing examples, concrete examples of how companies can use the benchmark beyond what we as WBA or civil society allies can advocate with the insights that we gather from this research. I have questions as well, but first I'll open the floor to participants and see if someone maybe wants to share a question, either pick up the mic or just place in the chat. No one so far. So if that's okay, I'll just go on with one question that I had myself, because urban being typically perceived at least as a very public arena and a very public space, with local governments taking the lead in the provision of public services or in the coordination of urban planning. I wonder, and WBA also working so closely and engaging companies primarily, I wonder if we will plan to engage local governments at all, and if yes, how we will do this in the process of the research and publications that follow.
Thank you for the question, Sibora. This is, I would say, again, WBA focuses mainly on companies, that's true. But during our consultation processes, of course, especially notably, I guess, in the last event that we attended, Asia Pacific Urban Forum, where we had our latest consultation, we do have participation. We do see participation from local governments. And you're right, urban is very much a public sector, right? It's not clearly defined just yet, how much is the accountabilities of the private sector in contributing to shaping the urban environment just yet. So in order to gain more clarity, of course, we do have plans to engage with local governments. There are some that we have engaged in the past, but going forward, I guess, considering the number of local governments out there, right, in the world, I guess our engagement strategy going forward would be to engage with local government associations and perhaps see if we can learn from their members what the needs are essentially and what the roles of companies and private sector actors ought to be in shaping a more sustainable urban environment, because I'm sure they have their own opinions as well on this. Just that.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for answering that, Tony. And I'll just let participants know that if any other questions come up related to your presentation, we do welcome them. Between today and tomorrow, we will register questions and try to answer each and every one of them. So I'll give the floor then to Besmira, who will delve a little bit deeper into the methodology and the steps ahead in the research process.
Thank you, Sibora. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this session on launching the urban benchmarking methodology. Tony provided a pretty comprehensive overview of what we do as an organization, also what we're aiming to achieve. I am the research lead of the Urban Benchmark, so I will use the next few minutes to share with you a little bit of our thinking behind the methodology. So what informed our rationale behind the indicators that we have selected to use for the benchmarking process, as well as discuss a few milestones to come in the next few months in terms of our benchmarking process. I will quickly share my presentation with everyone. I hope you can see my slides. So basically, I think it might be also redundant after Tony's conversation on why urban environments are important, are actually key to promoting more sustainability, to go back and discuss again why. But I think for me, this map, for instance, is a quite interesting conversation starter in that it overlays nighttime lights data set, which are usually used as a proxy for economic activities, with all the cities with a population over 300,000 and also with megacities. And you can see that there is quite some correlation between the two, which makes it very also visually apparent that much of the human activity actually happens in urban environments. Urban cities in general generate about 80% of the world's GDP. And at the same time, in doing so, they also are big contributors to climate change problems and issues that we face nowadays, with over 75% of global CO2 emissions coming from cities, primarily transport and construction industries, other industries as well, being contributors. And at the same time, not only are cities important in terms of footprint, but they're also important to think about from the perspective of recipients of basically the consequences of any sustainable or unsustainable practices of development that we follow. Urban environments are indeed the most exposed to heat waves or issues to do with water scarcity, flooding, and so on, that we have probably seen more and more becoming a topic of conversation in news over the last decades. So to this end, we think that, of course, there is no surprise that one of the SDGs in 2015 that UN discussed was the one on cities, so on making cities or human settlements more inclusive, but at the same time safe, resilient, and sustainable. And of course, in line with that, the New Urban Agenda, released in 2016, also aligned the priorities of creating more sustainable urban environments and resilient urban environments. Nevertheless, we see that it is only recently that cities are taking an important place in the global sustainability agenda. For instance, the New Urban Agenda has only been taken up by 20% of the countries so far in a recent UN Habitat report from 2023. It is only last year that cities were formally invited to participate in the COP28. So we find that there is indeed an important gap in first defining the role that urban environments have to contribute to sustainability, but especially we find as WBA that within urban environments, the role of private actors in promoting more sustainability is also something that needs to be explored further. And that was the starting point for our benchmarking exercise and for thinking about the private sector in providing sustainability in urban environments. Of course, as Tony mentioned, creating sustainable urban environments is a multi-stakeholder effort. primarily shared, of course, with the public sector, the public policies advanced through land use plans. However, we believe that companies also have a key role to play, and we want to explore what companies are doing, or at least companies in the key industries which we have identified, where they stand compared to their industry peers. And in doing so, we want to identify what the best practices are, who are the top performers, and at the same time try to understand what levers can be pulled to push for more sustainability practices in the industries that we are benchmarking. The results of our work are, of course, open and free for everyone to use. And they can be used, and we hope will be used by a multitude of stakeholders that are interested in furthering the sustainable urban development agenda. How did we approach the methodology? So there has been, of course, quite some discussion around what do we consider sustainable when we talk about sustainable urban environments. And both the SDGs and the New Urban Agenda, they do identify themes that are of importance, but they fall short in defining sustainability as such. And to that end, we have taken stock from existing sustainability frameworks, primarily the donut economics, which builds on the concept of planetary boundaries, but also it complements it with the concept of the social boundaries. So the donut economic framework identifies as the safe or sustainable operating space that human activity should basically happen in between or promoting the fulfillment of the social foundation, so the fulfillment of the basic social needs within the boundaries or the ecological ceiling, as is illustrated in this graph. And we also think that the activity from the private sector should also be conducted or approached with a similar mindset when we discuss sustainability. And this has informed our identification of the main indicators that we use to understand how companies are performing. We have identified 24 indicators distributed amongst 4 measurement areas, from indicators that look at governance and strategy in measurement area 1, which assesses how companies' sustainability strategies and objectives are aligned with the SDGs, but also to what extent they're aligned with local development goals. This is particularly important for urban environments. 2 indicators that look at inclusivity aspects, so which assess how companies deliver adequate, affordable, and accessible housing and services. And at the same time, this measurement area looks at the contribution that the private sector makes on the local economies. The third measurement area, healthy cities, through which we assess the company's contribution to human health through provision of public and green spaces, but also through reducing the impact that the private sector has on different resources, such as air pollution or water, as well as waste reduction. And finally, the fourth measurement area, we have a group of indicators through which we are assessing how companies perform in terms of reducing emissions, but also employing more energy efficient practices, as well as to what extent they support urban environments becoming more resilient, especially from a natural disaster risk resilience perspective. And all these 4 measurement areas contribute to 80% of the scoring, with 20% being covered by what we refer to as the core social indicators, which are indicators shared amongst all benchmarks in WBA that look particularly at human rights, decent work, and ethical conduct. And in this way, we're hoping to have looked at both sides or both aspects of sustainable development, both the social foundation and how companies support that, whilst, of course, observing planetary boundaries. In terms of the scope, so what we seek to do with this iteration of the urban benchmark is assessing 300 of the biggest companies that operate in one of the 4 industries that we have identified as key in achieving the SDG 11 particularly. And these industries are real estate. Here we include, of course, property owners and property development companies. Construction and engineering. Here we look at construction companies primarily operating in urban areas, so in buildings and urban infrastructure. Here we also include the biggest architectural and urban design companies who, of course, influence the urban environment through their design projects. Transportation, here we look at urban passenger transport companies and also ride-hailing companies. And finally, utilities, where we include suppliers of energy, so gas and electricity transmission and distribution companies, water and sanitation companies, and urban waste management companies. Here you can see a distribution of companies per sector. So about half of the companies we look at are from real estate and construction, and the other half servicing this real estate and construction, so utilities and transport. We have selected these 300, what we consider keystone companies, following 5 principles. So we aimed to find companies that dominate global production revenues, but also companies that control globally relevant segments of production, companies that connect ecosystems through their value chains, companies that are influential in terms of the extent to which they influence governance processes and institutions. And at the same time, companies that have a global footprint, especially in developing countries. And for the urban benchmark, we've also added another criteria, which is the geographic distribution. We sought to have a geographic distribution of companies that mirrors the GDP, population, as well as megacity distribution worldwide. And here is a map of the distribution of companies based on where their headquarters are located. But equally important, and perhaps even more important for us, is to know where the company's operations are located. And this is a map, a first tentative to indicate where the 300 companies that we are benchmarking have their operations in. And as you can see, we of course have, for instance, locations such as Australia, where we look at 3 companies that are that have headquarters there, but 47 companies that operate there. And the same applies for many other countries in which we have sought to find companies that operate internationally and thus provide a larger cover in terms of their footprint. Quickly on the next steps. So the methodology development process was a process that took over a year. We first shared an online draft last year in January, which was open for public consultation. And the public consultation took initially first 6 months, including a variety of online consultations and sessions, as well as the WBA's Allies Assembly in June 2023 in Mexico City was also used as a platform to discuss these initial ideas behind the methodology. We also discussed various aspects of the methodology with our expert review committee members, and some of which are also attending this session, and I thank them for their contribution and the very interesting conversations we've had. These members are, of course, from different backgrounds and organizations, and they have supported us, particularly throughout the finalization of the methodology. And lastly, the latest round of consultation was in October last year in the 8th Asia Pacific Urban Forum held in Suwon City, South Korea, where we socialized the last version of the methodology. As we move towards our benchmarking process, so we now have the methodology published and it's accessible through our website since January this year. We will then move to data collection, and the whole benchmarking cycle is basically an iterative process throughout which we not only collect data, but we also engage with companies to discuss the validity of the information that we have collected, primarily through company disclosures. That is the main source of the data, and therefore engagement with companies is very important, as well as we conduct analysis and publish our insights with a larger group of stakeholders other than companies, seeking to establish an inclusive dialogue. And at the end of each benchmarking process, of course, we take a moment to also reevaluate our methodology. And this will especially be the case for urban, since it is quite a new topic in terms of benchmarking the private sector. So understanding how comprehensive our methodologies and how accurately they cover the key topics is also important for us at the end of the process. Moving forward, so from March, from this month onwards, we are already starting with the data collection, and we will have several points during this process to engage with companies. And we're aiming to have our benchmarking results ready by November 2024, point in which I will of course, look forward to also to engage with all of you in discussing what the results of this first iteration look like. Until then, I will thank you all for your attention and will give the word back to Sibora for any questions or discussions on this part of the conversation.
Thank you, Besmira. I'll wait to see. I have noted down some questions that we have received in the past days, but I'll wait to see if we have actually someone asking live online here via the chat window, or if you'd like to take the floor and ask directly. All right, well then, if it's okay with everyone, I'll take one question that was sent to us by Julia Katz, the Systemic Director of Natural Resources, on which databases are being leveraged for the research and the benchmark.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an important question. As I mentioned, we are primarily collecting information that is publicly available. So we only work with publicly available data, as we both are trying to benchmark companies' performance as much as efforts towards more transparency from the private sector. So we work with company disclosures. So anything that companies disclose in their annual reports, ESG reports, usually only official sources. Information that is available in a company's website is also a database that we look into, that we leverage, as well as ESG databases that contain validated information that can be traced back to companies. So we will only be working with information that is publicly available. Whilst at the same time, during the engagement process, we invite companies to really look at our initial assessments and see whether we've captured this information accurately and whether there is data that is out there that we might have missed. This is always important because it really validates our efforts to make as accurate evaluations as possible, as well as gives company an opportunity to provide more updated information and therefore to have their scores reflect the most up-to-date information out there.
Yes, Besmira, thank you. You have answered my question. My next question was going to be on what are the channels and the pathways for companies to directly engage with the process. So
Yeah,
And I see Tony. Yeah, please do go
if
on
I
if you
may
have
just
something to
add
add. Yeah.
to your last question, Sibora, during the process, so once we start the benchmark, we inform all the companies within our scope that they are part of the benchmarking process. And as soon as we have the initial assessments, we share it with companies, giving them a certain amount of time to look at their assessments, to reach out to us if they want to know more on how we conduct the evaluation, and to provide written feedback, which is always taken into consideration, if supported, of course, by data, for their company scorecards. And these are the channels of communication. So we constantly reach out to companies and remind them, of course, of the deadlines approaching on their feedback as well.
Yes, and I see Nora online also has a related question and I'll just give the word to Tony after this. But just because maybe it's related, it says about the online draft, which is open for the public. I want to know to what extent the public can participate in this draft. I'm not sure if she refers to the methodology, Nora, or to the assessment.
Yeah, the methodology.
Yeah. All right.
I can also address this question as well. Nora, you're probably looking at the draft methodology that we published last year. We published it in January 2023, and it was open for consultation for over 6 months. And that was the whole process that we followed for revising and finalizing the methodology. Now we have an updated version of the methodology. So again, if you look at the same in the same website, you will find the final version published this year in January, and that is a finalized version, which means that that is the methodology that we're using for this year's iteration. However, as I mentioned, after each year, we do have a moment of sitting and discussing whether the methodology needs revising and including feedback that we have received along the way. So we're always open to receiving feedback, even though the methodology for this year will be applied as is. Your feedback is always welcomed to improve the methodology for the next iterations.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you for your question.
Oh, thank you, Nora, for asking. I'd like to give the word to Tony. I think Tony, while someone else is writing in the chat, maybe Tony, you can address you. Your hand was raised.
Honestly, my raised hand was to bring up the attention to the chat. That's it. So I guess that's already been answered too, but just a little bit more explanation on what Besmira has already explained. Of course, the methodology is open for feedback throughout the year, but of course, for this year, we're going with the version that we have already finalized earlier this year. I think it was published like 31st of January, and that's the version of the methodology that we're using for the assessment this year. But we'll get back to you on our next assessment cycle, but I believe Urban is doing another assessment cycle next year as well. So your input will potentially be incorporated into the next version of the methodology iteration, if that's of any answer. Just that.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Besmira. I know someone else was writing in the chat, but I don't see the question. And in any case, I would really, I'm going to put my email here in the chat, and you also have Tony's email, and we'll both be on standby today and tomorrow to receive any further questions. So feel free to reach out, and then we'll gather all those questions received, even the ones we received in the previous days, and we'll prepare a Q&A document that we'll send your way. We'll send the presentations, we'll send the recording, and we'll be in touch. We will very much be proactively engaging with all of you. And if there's nothing else left, I'd like to thank everyone for having participated and the team for being so cautious of time. We were very efficient. So on my side, thanks everyone. And I don't know if Besmira and Tony have any closing remarks, and that will be it for me.
No, okay. I just wanted to thanks everyone and to, of course, ask everyone to stay tuned, because we will still, during the year, have drop-in sessions for more conversations on the methodology, and for more conversations on how the benchmarking process is going. So this is only the beginning of our conversation, and definitely I'm hoping to see many of you attend these drop-in sessions throughout the year.
Similar to what Besmira is saying, just want to thank everyone for their attendance and participation in the session. Besmira is giving people about hints about like our drop-in sessions and inputs about the methodology. On my side, we'll be posting updates as well in social media, in LinkedIn, key sessions or or events that we attend as we try to socialize and then eventually publish the results of the methodology. We'll keep you all informed of those updates as well. So again, part of the start of the conversation, but going ahead, we'll keep you all in the loop of how things are progressing on our side. Just that.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Have a
you.
lovely rest of the day.
Thank you, everyone.
Likewise. Bye.